Welcome back to our monthly Tango Alpha Lima Be the One podcast. I'm your host, Amy Forsyth, and I'll be here on the first of each month with guests who provide expertise, resources, and peer-to-peer support as part of the American Legion's Be the One initiative to prevent suicide within the veteran community. Learn more at betheone.org, and let's get today's conversation started. Today, our guest is Jason Redman, a retired Navy SEAL who has mastered the art of getting through tough times. His resilience has inspired thousands, and through his company, SOF Spoken, he has provided inspirational coaching to share his methods for leadership, teamwork, and overcoming adversity in businesses, first responders, sports teams, and government organizations. Jason, it is absolutely my pleasure to welcome you to the Tango Alpha Lima Be the One podcast.
Amy, honored to be on. Big shout out to all our veterans out there who are listening.
Thank you so much. You know, many people have seen you speak and heard your story, but there's probably a new generation of military veterans out there who aren't as familiar, especially that post 9/11 generation who know you. But I really want to talk today about your journey, your leadership journey, and what you're doing now. You know, you post your military service, but take us back to really kind of your childhood. We'd want to know where you grew up and how you ended up joining the Navy.
Yeah, I grew up a little bit all over the place. I'm a mutt. I'm originally from Ohio, so big shout out to the great state of Ohio. Although it was a rough year for us in the football front in sports. My Bengals got knocked out. Browns did okay. The Buckeyes got knocked out. So anyways, I'm originally from Ohio, and I ended up moving all over the place. Came from a military family. So grew up listening to the stories of my grandfather, who was a decorated World War II fighter or bomber pilot. My dad was an airborne instructor in the 60s, so I thought jumping out of planes was really cool. And from a young age, it's what I wanted to do. I heard about the SEAL teams probably when I was about 13 or 14 and started looking into that. And that is the road that I ended up going down. We're just a family of military members because, you know, from my grandfather, my great uncle on my mom's grandfather's side, he fought with the French in World War II, which is where they were from back then. And then fast forward to our generation, my sister was Air Force, my brother was a Marine, and then of course I ended up joining the Navy.
Yeah, you joined the Navy, became a SEAL. You were enlisted Navy SEAL, working as a navigator here in your bio for 11 years. And with many deployments to Central and South America. And then you commissioned as a SEAL officer in 2004 and spent 10 years as a Navy SEAL officer and combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then outside Fallujah, Iraq. And I know this area very well. I was there in 2006 and I went back in 2008. But tell us your story in 2007 about your injuries. If you can take us back and give people a sense of what was going on and what you went through there.
Yeah, so I was assigned to SEAL Team 10, Task Unit Fallujah. We arrived into Iraq in the early spring of 2007. Iraq was very volatile during that time, Amy, as you well know. 2006 through the 2007 into 2008 timeframe. Iraq had just kind of imploded. We had almost a civil war in between the Sunni part, the Shia part, the insurgent groups that were there. You had strong Iranian influence. Iran was pretty much fighting a proxy war with us through the Sadr militia. So just a very messy time to be in Iraq and a very violent time. I think so many of our injuries and losses that came out of Iraq came during that heavy 06, 07 time period. So we got there in, like I said, the spring, April of 07, and launched into a very heavy combat deployment. It was our job to go after, find, fix, and finish mid-level and senior level Al-Qaeda and insurgent leaders. And it was a very successful deployment. We conducted, my troop task unit Fallujah conducted over 80 direct action missions. We killed quite a few of the leaders who did not want to go down without a fight. And we captured 124 mid-level and high-level, which enabled a lot of additional information for us and for other units throughout the Anbar province. 1 week prior to going home, we had been hunting the senior leader for Al Qaeda the whole deployment, a very dangerous individual that our troop had come into contact with on one of the first missions of our deployment. We lost a SEAL on that mission. Petty Officer Clark Schwedler was killed. We lost one of our Iraqi scouts on that mission. A couple of other guys got wounded. And we had been hunting this individual all deployment, always falling short, always just missing him. So on the night of September 12th, we got word he was going to be in a specific time and location, something we call a time-sensitive target. We launched on that mission. The initial target takedown, the individual was not there, but we found a lot of activity. Somebody had been there recently. And as we dug deeper and explored that site, we started finding a lot of explosives, ID making components, weapons, things like that. So we were going to blow all that stuff in place. We thought it was going to be a quiet night. And then about 2 a.m., our snipers noticed a lot of activity on another house about 150 yards away. We maneuvered on that house and walked into a very well-executed ambush. The leader was indeed in that house, and his entire security team, we estimate 12 to 15 very well-trained fighters, had set up an ambush line. And myself and my team of 8 or 9, including our interpreter, walked into this ambush. We had been split, and I'll avoid some of those fine details. If anybody wants to read about it, all of that's in my book, The Trident, or in many other podcasts. But the bottom line is there were 6 of us that got caught in this vicious crossfire, 2 PKM machine guns, what we estimate to be 12 AK fighters, and 3 of the 6 of us were shot up in that engagement. I was hit 8 times between my body and body armor, 2 rounds in the elbow, rounds across the body armor. I took rounds off my helmet, night vision tube shot off, rounds off my gun, rounds off my right side plate. I tried to turn and get back, and that's when I caught a round in the face that traveled through my face, took off my nose, blew out my right cheekbone, broke what was left with cheekbone, kicked it out to the right, vaporized more over the floor, broke all the bones above my eye, shattered my jaw, and knocked me out. My team leader did an amazing job of leading that fight, and our guys fought ferociously to help save my life. The firefight, we estimate, lasted about 40 minutes, and probably in the final 10 minutes, I think my team leader recognized that, we were going to bleed out before we could ever get the medevac in, and we were going to run out of ammo. So we called in a fire mission that ended up being the closest fire mission ever executed in the Iraq War. We called rounds directly on our position from a AC-130 gunship. And thanks to the amazing precision targeting of that Air Force 4th SOS gunship and the smart tactical call, the way my team leader executed that fire mission, we were able to take out the enemy and get out of there. So I owe my life to the gunship, I owe my life to my teammates, and I owe my life to the amazing military medical professionals in Baghdad who saved me.
Wow, Jason, thank you so much for sharing that. It must be hard to relive it every time someone asks you about it and you go into detail. You just almost can't even imagine unless you were there. And, they call that Anbar province and Fallujah, Ramadi, some of the toughest dirt in the world, really, during those years, 2006, 7, even 8. And so much sorrow and sadness thinking back to the losses there. But you've lived your life and carried on with such determination and resilience, and just an example for the rest of us veterans to really emulate and follow your lead. But for those who don't know, I'm reading more about your bio, and I remember this when this happened. When you were recovering from your injuries at Bethesda, you hung a sign on the door, and known as the sign on the door. Can you tell people a little bit about that and how you've sort of coped with, the new reality once you made it back to the States after this happened in Iraq?
Yeah, I mean, I won't lie. I mean, it was tough to have your face blown apart. I was really struggling with it. I felt like, man, I'm going to be disfigured and this monster for the rest of my life. I'll tell you what, it was 96 hours between the time I left Iraq and the time I saw my wife. I was terrified at how my wife was going to handle that. I was terrified at what my kids were going to think. Were my kids going to be afraid of their daddy and see me as this monster? Um, and I got to the hospital, and in the military, and specifically in special operations, we have a phrase called, in an attack, how you survive is you have to aggressively get off the X. The X being the point of attack, the point of the crisis, the point of incident, and that really kind of became my mindset. I began to realize that I could not change anything that had happened. Um, and in life, we waste so much time worried about, we look at the past and we want back what, happened in the past, or we look at the future and we say, well, this isn't going to happen or that's going to happen. All I knew is that I could drive forward and I could just shape and control what I could, which was the biggest thing was myself and my attitude. And I also looked at, I was doing my wife and my kids. I mean, feeling sorry for myself wasn't going to do anything. Neither was feeling sorry for myself. It wasn't going to make a positive impact on any of the guys and gals who were around me, because there were a lot of young men and women who were severely wounded in that hospital around me. So I'm kind of struggling with all these things, wrapping my head around these ideas, and kind of a pivotal final moment hit that spurred this and started all this. There were some individuals that came into the room, and they were talking to me, and then a nurse came in. They stepped off to the side, and I overheard bits and pieces of their conversation. And Amy, I think you've probably been in the military medical wards during war. It is a very hard place to be. You see young men and women who are blown apart, who are missing limbs, gunshot wounds, high velocity gunshot wounds do devastating injuries, TBIs, burns, all these things. And I think all of that overwhelmed them to the point that they were overcome with grief and sorrow. And they started talking about what a shame, what a pity. We send these men and women off to war and they come home, they're never going to be the same. And they left, and the nurse left. And I remember laying there thinking to myself, like, holy shit, is that me? Is this my future? And it was kind of in that moment, I mean, in alignment with this idea of getting off the axe and everything else, I was just like, no, that's not going to be me. Like, I'm going to drive forward. I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to be positive. I'm just going to be relentless in how I drive forward. And that's how the sign on the door came to be. My wife came back into the room, and I wrote to her, I said, hey, no one is allowed to come into this room from this moment forward and have sorrow. Like, it ain't going to happen. Like, it's going to be positive. We're going to drive forward. And I wrote it out, and it said, attention to all who enter here. If you're coming to this room with sadness or sorrow, don't bother. The wounds I received, I got in a job that I love, doing it for people that I love, defending the freedom of the country that I deeply love. I will make a full recovery. What is full? That's the absolute utmost physically. I have the ability to recover. And then I'm going to push that about 20% further through sheer mental tenacity. This room you're about to enter is a room of fun, optimism, and intense rapid regrowth. If you're not prepared for that, go elsewhere. And we signed it to management and put it on the door. A teammate took his trident off his uniform and tacked it into the bottom of the sign a few days later. And a New York firefighter who had lost both sons on 9/11 took a picture of it and wrote a blog about it, and it went viral from there.
Amazing, really something to revisit after all these years for the next generation of warriors out there who are really struggling with life in general, or an injury or an illness. You as that example, that inspirational example of all these things that happened in the wars and from 9/11 on, even just tremendous. And what it reminds me of is the line in the movie where earn this life from Saving Private Ryan. And you have taken that to the heights, Jason, of the veteran community out there who served in combat and was injured. You have really come home and taken that to the next level. Can you talk about, you ended up retiring, and then transitioning into and creating this path of leadership development and your journey to inspire people. Can you talk to us and walk us through that and what you've been hearing and seeing out there as you travel the country and connect with people?
Yeah, I mean, the world is a dynamic place. It's hard to be a leader in this world. And I think we've also, I think sometimes we squash some individuals who try to grow as a leader, and there's a balance there. And one of the unique things, a large part of my story, a lot of people don't realize, they see the sign on the door and they hear about my injuries. But a bigger part of the story is prior to all that happening, I failed as a young leader. And it was those several years of growing up as a young leader and coming to understand what it is to be a leader, and really reinventing myself, having to overcome a bad call on a mission in Afghanistan, and rebuilding my credibility and the respect that you need in special operations. And that really became the foundation of my leadership and everything that I now teach on in leadership. And these aren't high level strategic things. I'm not going to come into a, Fortune 500 company, Google, and teach you how to make long-term strategic decision making. But what I am very good at teaching and very good at reminding people is leadership at the end of the day comes back to the individual. If you want to be a great CEO, if you want to be a great manager, if you want to be a great engineer, if you want to be a great family man, if you want to be a great mom, dad, I don't care what it is, it comes back to how you lead yourself. And then how do you apply those things into building teams? How do you apply those things into goal setting and goal accomplishment? So those are the things that I speak to companies about. How do we be well functioning leaders who lead ourselves and then translate that into either our team or our company or the organization we work for? And it has been incredibly well received. I've probably done over 600 events at this point, from Fortune 500 companies to professional sports teams to whoever it is. And just that message of, hey, one, it always comes back to you. And then two, have some perspective. We live in one of the greatest countries in the world, and oftentimes people lose sight of that. We often joke about first world problems, and I watch so many companies, individuals, people who have lost sight of the fact, man, we're so blessed to be here. I'm so thankful that I'm still alive and here. And that perspective enables me to drive forward and not worry about some of the little stuff that I think so many people get caught up in that stalls them from achieving or being the best version of themselves.
And when you go around and during your speaking engagements, what are people responding to most? You're overcoming that mindset, or overcoming, adversity, getting off the X. What are the things you think people really take away and implement or adopt in their own mindset from your experience?
The two biggest takeaways, I'll run into people years later who, saw me speak, and they'll usually shout out one of two things: get off the X being one of the biggest one. My second book, Overcome, we get deep into the methodology of how you build an overcome mindset to be able to get off the X in any aspect of your life, business, family. I don't care what catastrophic. I call them life ambushes. I survived the vicious enemy ambush. Everybody's going to get ambushed in life. And if you build an overcome mindset, we accept the fact that bad things happen to good people all the time. But if you understand that the faster I get off the X, time is relative, the faster you're going to drive forward and the faster you're going to find success out of it. So get off the X is one. And the other one relates to perspective. I talk about the fact how blessed I am. Amy, you mentioned in the beginning, I've lost a lot of friends. Man, 9/11 forward had a pretty tremendous impact on the SEAL teams. I mean, I think at this point we've lost close to 100 individuals since then, and we're a very tight-knit community. I attended probably over 50 memorials and funerals over my career for friends I lost. And I think to myself, man, when we get so wrapped around the axle about the problems or the things we're facing, I just think about that those guys who are no longer here would give anything to still be here to deal with that problem. Their families would give anything to still be here to deal with that problem. And people use the trite phrase on a regular basis, "Oh my God, I'm having a bad day." And I try never to say that. I live this motto and this mindset of no bad days. Doesn't mean I don't have hard days, doesn't mean I don't have tough days. But if you're still here and you're still breathing, that means whatever problem you're facing, you still have the ability to affect an outcome. It may not happen today, it may not happen tomorrow, it may be next week. You may never be able to fix it. But guess what? You're still here to be able to love your family, to be with your friends. Maybe you need to go in a different direction, whatever it is. So I live the mindset of no bad days. And there's a lot of people who will come up to me years later and say, "No bad days." I even have a line of clothing with my skull on it called the No Bad Days line.
A reframe mantra that people need to hear every once in a while if they get caught up in those small things of life that can bring you down. And, a lot of the Be the One mission with the American Legion is to really help those maybe veterans or veteran community with those that are struggling with those bad days and take suicide as, the ultimate out. And we want to reduce and prevent veteran suicide. And so I know you've probably had dark feelings and had friends with that same feeling, but what would you say to them, and how have you been able to overcome that yourself, and what would you share with them?
I would say, one, I used to think that purpose was the answer to the suicide problem we were having. But as I've been around the community and I've lost friends, including my best friend to suicide, I began to realize there's two components to this. There is a psychological component and there is a physiological component. One of the problems with the psychological component is we come from, the military community. We're tough. We build warriors. I mean, we send you to boot camp, we send you to war, and we teach you have to be tough, you have to endure, you have to see and do horrible things. And you come out of that and you want to maintain this tough mindset, but we need to break the stigma that it's okay. Seeing people's insides on their outside is just not normal. I don't care who you are, man. I have a lot of friends who are doctors. I have a lot of friends who are medical first responders. No matter how much you see it, it hurts inside of our brain, no matter how stoic you may be, and you'll carry those scars with you. So I think the first thing is we've got to accept that those psychological scars we carry are okay. Number two, on the psychological side, I meet a lot of veterans who don't want to reach out for help and they want to try and self-medicate or figure it out on their own. I tried to do that for a period of time. And finally, thankfully, my wife called me out on it, was like, "Hey, you need to go get help." And I did, and I reached out. But what I try and tell so many veterans that are out there, because what'll happen is they'll say, "Hey, I need help," and they'll try one thing. And if that one thing doesn't work, they immediately go back into their hole and continue to self-medicate. And I'm like, "Look, man, there's all kinds of different tactics and strategies for everything we do in life. Battlefield's no different. What we do in business is no different. And you owe it to yourself to figure out what's going to work for you. You may need 4 or 5 different modalities that you try before you find the one that works for you. And just because it works for me doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And because it worked for you, Amy, doesn't mean it's going to work for somebody else." So that's what I encourage you. Number one, don't be afraid to ask for help. It's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. Number two, you owe it to yourself to try as many different programs that are out there before you find the one that truly helps you. Now we get on to the physiological problem, and that is, I think this war is a signature turning point in our history of warfare. I think post 9/11, we started using explosives at a much higher level. And maybe with artillery in World War II, they just didn't understand it. But now, fast forward to today, we're starting to understand it. And what we're seeing is the amount of blast, whether it was IEDs or whether it's frontline combat units, our infantry, our special operations, our artillery men and women, we are seeing significant damage to the brain. And so many of my friends that have taken their lives, we are autopsying them post-mortem, and the doctors are seeing cellular damage, traumatic brain injuries, but at a very cellular level, and degenerative. A lot of people have watched the NFL and read stories. Maybe they saw the movie Concussion, and we are having a lot of veterans who are taking their lives, and post-mortem we're seeing signs of either arterial intraglial scarring, I think it's called, or CTE, which is a higher level degenerative. So these are the things. Unfortunately, with that, there is not an answer yet. I'm on the board for Concussion Legacy Foundation. It's one of our missions to try and fund research to study brains and to come up with ways that we can both diagnose, prevent, and treat these debilitating diseases. Because right now we're just at the forefront of understanding them. And unfortunately, after 20 years of war, for so many of our veterans who my age, maybe a little younger, maybe a little older, from the 9/11 wars, I think we're going to see more of this. So if you, Concussion Legacy Foundation has a hotline you can call. If you or a loved one, you're a veteran out there, and maybe you are like, man, I can't think straight, I'm having issues, I can't remember things, all signature signs of TBI, or your loved one is, you can call the hotline go to Concussion Legacy Foundation website, and we have a lot of resources that we can help you and try and steer you in the right direction with that.
Great. And you were a part of the American Legion National Convention last year, and you spoke on this topic as an awareness and educating people on the damage that can be done from the concussions. And so there are some other treatments out there, but I want to ask you about your writing your books. Was that therapeutic for you and for other veterans out there thinking of writing a book? How did that help you? And what would you recommend for other veterans out there who want to try that as a therapy, perhaps?
I believe firmly in it. The trauma, whatever trauma we go through in this life, whether it's military trauma, whether it's sexual trauma, emotional trauma, verbal trauma, it leaves a scar in your brain. And so many people want to bottle that scar up and not talk about it. James Hatch is a fellow SEAL. He wrote a great book called Touching the Dragon. And he describes the trauma we go through as that dragon. And so many of us want to box this dragon up, put it in a cage and lock it up. But the problem is it's a dragon. It's going to break out. Any of you that watch Game of Thrones know the dragon burned down the city, and it's no different in your mind. So instead of letting the dragon own you and live in your mind ready to eat you, I think you have to get it out. You have to learn to touch the dragon and live with that dragon and tame the dragon. And the only way you can do that is by talking about it and coming to understand it and coming to grips with it. And that's what I did. I think it was incredibly cathartic for me to write and talk about these things. I try to encourage other veterans to do it. I know it's hard, especially if you lost a friend, but it's like a disease inside your head, and until you learn to get it out, it's going to eat away like that dragon. So I highly recommend it. It doesn't even have to be a book, man. Just start journaling about all that stuff. If it's really hard, get a counselor, get a therapist, and write all this stuff down, and then share it with them and talk through it. But no matter what, you got to get it out.
Great. And we've had some other previous guests on Be the One podcast, Amber and Marcus Capone, talking about alternative therapies, and Juliana Mercer as well. What's your take on some of these new and experimental therapies that the VA is now trying to get through some studies? Are you familiar, or have you done this yourself?
100%. I have not done. So Amber and Marcus, I actually served with Marcus. I've known them for years. I love what they're doing. And it's the psychedelic treatment. So they're doing psilocybin and MDMA, I believe it is, and Ibogaine are the treatments they're doing, although they're not legal here in the US. People are having to go to Mexico, but they're raising awareness. And what's interesting, Stanford just did a study last year, and they are actually seeing new neural pathways that are being written through some of these treatments. So I think there's a lot of research that's going into it. Here's my mindset. Science sometimes science sometimes stalls impact, if this makes sense. And why do I say that? Because sometimes we get in the way. We won't allow anecdotal evidence to drive things. And the reality is, I know guys who are ready to take their lives, who are at rock bottom, who their wives were like, I don't know this person anymore. I don't want to live with them. And they went down and they got that treatment and they came back changed individuals. They became the person they were before all that trauma occurred. And I've seen that happen again and again and again and again and again. So to me, yes, maybe the science hasn't caught up yet, but the anecdotal evidence is worth it. I hope that the VA and our government will continue to fight, because for our veterans who have gone to war, who sacrifice themselves for their country, that makes, I mean, that, in my opinion, giving them an opportunity. And for many of them, they're willing to say, hey, I'm willing to take a little bit of risk if it'll make me feel better. And at the end of the day, I think that's what it's about. So I support any program that's out there that shows itself to do more good than harm. And these treatments right now are definitely doing that.
Yeah, we've I think they're doing some partnerships with the VA now, and they're doing some clinical trials, so there'll be more to come. But anything that we can do and shout from the rooftops about ways to enrich veterans' lives and prevent suicide, reduce suicide. We've had some cases recently of veterans suicide, 2 women actually. Maybe you saw it on social media. And so through Be the One and American Legion, we want to just share all the resources that are available to veterans out there and their families as well. Jason, in your wildest dreams, before you even joined the Navy and Navy SEALs, did you imagine yourself being propelled to this level of public speaking and sharing your inspirational message with top companies around the world internationally, and then the things you're doing in your advocacy? Did you ever know did you know that where this would all lead?
No, it's so funny. I mean, it's amazing, and we're just so blessed. No, never once did I ever think when I was a young kid, hey, someday you're going to be a speaker, someday you'll be an author. Never on my radar, never really thought about it. But it is amazing. My wife and I just purchased a large commercial building. That's our new headquarters. It's an event center. And just last week, we hung a 12x8 flag in the center foyer. And it gave me chills because it made me think about, both my wife and I did not come from means, both relatively poor. And I thought about, man, this really is the American dream. The American dream is still alive and well. I fought for it, but now like I'm living it. And this building, we're offering executive office space and the ability to do events. And I was like, man, this is so cool to be a part of this. And that, a relatively poor kid from Ohio and a relatively poor girl from Kentucky could get married and come together and own a building that hopefully enables others to follow their American dream. So man, there's so many people out there that say to me, hey, the American dream is dead. It's not, it's still alive. It's hard. You got to be creative. You got to grind, but it's out there. It's available. I mean, so yeah, I'm grateful, and I'm just trying to educate others on everything from trauma to leadership to entrepreneurship. Veterans, you guys have the tools to be successful as entrepreneurs. You unequivocally do. You just got to believe in yourself, and you're living in one of the greatest times that, with an iPhone, you can create a business. So don't limit yourself. Get out there and go after it.
And you could have done anything you wanted. You could have 1,000 different job offers and opportunities to do whatever you wanted, or nothing at all, really. As a retired Navy SEAL, you didn't have to do anything, but you chose this path to be on the road and inspire people and share your message. What is keeping you going to do that? Is it the feedback you're seeing out there, or the veteran community that needs the most help and inspiration? What keeps you going?
I just think a lot about the guys that we lost, friends of mine that are no longer here. And like I said, I talked about it earlier, they would give anything to still be here. Their spouses and their kids would give anything for them to still be here. So I just think to myself, man, I got to live the best life I possibly can. Because why did I get to come home and they didn't? So that drives me. I have 30 names tattooed on the inside of my arm of guys that either I directly knew or we lost on a mission I was somehow connected to, friends, teammates. I went through training with them. And they remind me like, hey, you have to go. You have to live the best life you possibly have. You don't have time to sit there and feel sorry for yourself or whine just because, I have some injuries or limitations, or sometimes I sore, or sometimes I don't feel good. Yes, that's life. But guess what? I want to try and make an impact because I owe it to them, in my opinion, to live the greatest life I can because they can't anymore.
And veterans like you flip the script on the broken veteran or the reputation of veterans not being successful. But I mean, you're just a shining example of when you succeed, we all succeed as all veterans. And when you go out there and you're making it happen and you share that message of survival, really surviving combat operations, and then surviving the post-combat post-combat trauma and those service members out there that are suffering, but you just can show them the path and the way, and you're out there doing that. We thank you for being a guest today and sharing your unique story with our listeners, and we'll have links in our show notes. But before we go, would you like to let our alphas know where they can find more information about you and your programs, your books, and just your overall inspiration, and people can connect with you?
Yeah, Amy, thank you. They can go to jasonredman.com. That's my main website. From there, you can find coaching, you can find courses we're doing, upcoming things. You can find all my socials. You can purchase signed copies of our books, some of the online courses that I have. All of it's there, jasonredman.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jason. It has been an absolute pleasure to reconnect with you. And we look forward to hearing updates and following your story, and just keep doing what you're doing because you're reaching people. You probably don't even realize how important and inspirational it is. So thank you so much.
I mean, my honor. Thank you guys for having me on.
Thanks. And thank you, Alphas, for tuning into the Tango Alpha Lima Be the One podcast. Remember, you can be the one to save one veteran. Find resources and more information at betheone.org and connect with the American Legion on social media to keep the conversation going. Don't forget to subscribe to Tango Alpha Lima podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find podcasts. And please share our podcast with others, like, follow, subscribe, and we'll see you on the 1st of next month. Thank you so much, Jason. Thanks. On the first day of every month, American Legion family members are encouraged to wear Be the One apparel to publicly show their commitment to reducing the stigma around mental health issues. Go to betheone.org to learn how you can be the one to save one veteran. If you're a veteran in crisis or concerned about one, call the Veterans Crisis Line at 988 and press 1. You're not alone. The Veterans Crisis Line is here for you, and you don't have to be enrolled in the VA. Help is available, and speak with someone today.